Chapter 31. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seems like the twins are at it again. First years should learn to bow their heads. True, if he did he probably wouldn't have ended up in such a pathetic state. A wave of whispers spread through the accumulating crowd. Diane could hardly hear them considering the current ringing of his ears. But, had he would only be able to sigh. Maybe this was just a difference in culture between the mortal world and martial world. In the mortal world, those who tried their best and worked hard would always be praised. But in the martial world, those who tried to do things beyond their means would only be looked down upon and called foolish. But, maybe this was just the way of reality in general. The only reason the mortal world could have such a culture was because the powerful built up safe and secure societies that allowed the weak to live peaceful lives. Criminals were punished by the law, women were protected by the government, orphans were taken in by the state. All of this bred a culture that praised hard work and perseverance. However, this wasn't the same in the martial world at all. This was a place where power ruled and oftentimes the law bent to the whims of whoever had the larger fist. Everything by absolute sympathy or absolute power. Ugh, how depressing, Diane said between coughs. So many pretty ladies are seeing me in such a pathetic state right now. Such a shame. Forget it, as long as my precious Madeline doesn't see me like this, I'll survive. Diane's sarcastic remarks made Blue want to pop a blood vessel. But, at that moment, Darius stepped forward. Let him go, Blue. Diane was dropped, causing him to almost stagger to the ground. His knees barely held himself up, his vision feeling quite blurry. At the moment, he could hardly stand straight. Clearly, he had a concussion, and a pretty bad one at that. I could kill you, but that would be too easy, said Darius with a snicker. So how about this? If you strip naked and kowtow to me 10 times I'll let these matters go. What do you think? Pretty simple, right? Diane put his hands on his knees, taking shallow breaths. After a moment quiet laughter filled the hallway, coming from his own lips. Ow, oh, that hurts. Don't laugh, don't laugh, don't laugh. Diane winced. It seems like he didn't hear me. Blue, break his left arm. Darius said indifferently. That might help him understand his situation a bit better. Snap. The ugly sound filled the hallway. Diane grunted and his breathing became even shallower. His breathing came out in shallow wheezes that almost sounded like whistles. I'll give you 3 more seconds, or we'll snap another limb. You don't have to be so mad, I can let you in on the joke even though it would ruin it. Diane replied. Snap. Sorry boss, 3 seconds weren't up yet. Don't worry, it was well warranted. Darius walked up to the disheveled Diane. At this point, Diane couldn't use his arms to support himself anymore. He was leaning his back against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His hair was a bloody mess, his pants and shirt were torn, and his arms hung limply to his side. However, his grin hadn't left his face. I was only laughing. Because a grown man asked a teen like me to strip naked. Don't you think that's a bit much? I don't swing that way, sir. Darius sent a kick at his chest, snapping his ribs. Diane's words left him so infuriated he forgot to hold back. Diane fell to his knees, unconscious. The crowd gasped, the audible snapping of bones replaying in their ears and bringing goosebumps to their skin. Their limbs trembled as though they were hearing a fork scrap against the bottom of a pot. That strength at least at the peak of the 3rd layer of the foundation stage. As expected from a top-ranked 3rd year. No, we can't end this like this. I can't let you die so easily. Wake up. Darius picked up Diane by his hair and slapped him awake. Diane's eyes fluttered, squinting as though he was trying to see the light. When he remembered the situation he was in, a bloody smile spread across his face. 5 more minutes, beautiful. Can't you see I was finally getting some rest? Blood spilled out of Diane's mouth and arms, pooling toward the ground. Seems like you're a bit delirious. Darius said, tilting up Diane's head, what should I do with you? Nah, I just thought you looked particularly womanly. So, I accidentally let it slap. Diane's words were stopped by another crisp slap. Let's try this again. Strip naked, and kowtow 10 times. Listen man, I was joking when I said you looked womanly, I already told you, I don't swing that slap. Alright, Darius said in a calm voice, you have one more chance, or I kill you. At that moment, Diane's eyes widened, gaining a sharp clarity they hadn't had before. The vicious look alone made Darius feel as though he had been plunged through the gates of hell. Didn't you hear me before? Diane said, his voice no longer slurring. You're just the slightly prettier monkey of the 3 of you. Kiss my ass, you overgrown mutt. Darius' face darkened. He's crazy, all he had to do was kneel and it would be over. Darius' fingers clasped harder around Diane's hair, staring daggers at him and nearly ripping it from his scalp. But all he found were eyes as calm as Focus Lake looking right back at him. You'd better kill me right here and right now. Diane's eyes darkened and an almost demonic voice continued, because if you don't, soon I'll crush you beneath my feet. I'll tear your limbs from your body. I'll torture you until you have no tears left to cry. And once you've been bled dry, I'll feed your corpse to pigs. Darius had no idea why, but a cold sweat filled his back and his usually calm face furrowed into a frown. I'd love to see your heroic rise, truly. But, unfortunately, you die today. Only trash beg for a second chance. In the martial world, you only get one. A strange energy filled Darius' right hand as the air around it seemed to be sliced as it passed through it. That's a sword-type energy. No, that's definitely spear-type energy. A sword is more elegant, this is more domineering than that. Darius truly is a genius. To reach the peak of the 3rd level at the start of his 3rd year and control spear chi. Wow. Darius sneered when he heard the words of the crowd. You can know that you're truly blessed to have died by my hands. Consider this as payment for offending me. The tips of Darius' fingers pierced into Diane's chest, slicing through the skin of some of his bone with absolute ease. He looked into Diane's eyes, wanting to see that final look of despair before he shot through his heart, but all he saw was the same unbreakable will, that same indifference as though it wasn't his own body being pierced through. Darius will quaked, his spear chi dispersing out of his control. He tried to form it again, but it collapsed even quicker this time, leaving him in a state of partial shock. In a rage, he formed his hand into a blade and shot forward without chi. He would pierce through by force if he had to. But at that very moment, a whip snapped through the air, latching onto his wrist. Chapter 32 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius felt a whipping pain in his wrist as though he had just been burnt. He couldn't help but wince slightly, his hand hanging frozen in the air. I think that's enough, Darius. You may be able to get away with killing him, but think of all the meetings that'll be necessary. Do you really want to waste hours of time on an ant you killed just to explain yourself? Darius looked over to find Ava controlling his arm. Unfortunately, he hasn't kowtowed to me or even faked a true apology. His fate is sealed. Darius went to move forward but found that he couldn't outdo Ava's strength. What is this? She may be ranked at the top of 2nd year, but I'm ranked near the top of the 3rd. Why can she hold me in check? Fine, since you need a woman to protect you, I think that's insulting enough. Blue, red, let's go. Darius let go of Diane after wiping his bloodied hand on the latter's shirt. Ava frowned as she watched Darius, red and blue, walk away before stepping toward Diane. You idiot, if you wanted to act cool, you should have found another place to do it, Ava said, not even attempting to go and help Diane up. There are things more important than your dignity. She didn't know why, but she felt livid at this moment. Why didn't this fool just bow his head? If she hadn't been making her rounds at this moment, wouldn't he be dead right now? Was it worth it? Were all men like this? Didn't they know there were people who would rather see them alive than dead? Ava couldn't even speak any other words. She was so furious that her chest heaved out of her control, her chest flushing red. Diane didn't respond to her, struggling to sit up. Oof, this is hard with two broken arms. Seeing that Diane was ignoring her, Ava only became more infuriated. You. At that moment, Diane looked up, causing her words to get caught in her throat. She didn't know what happened, but this Diane felt completely different from the one she knew. There was no smile in his eyes or teasing in the curl of his lips. He looked like he might kill her where she stood if she spoke a single word more. Diane eventually managed to stand, pushing himself up against the wall and rising to his feet. "Thank you," he said softly. Diane slowly walked to his dorm, seemingly not hearing any of the jeers fluttering toward his ears. As soon as he made it, the door closed, and he used his forehead to activate the shield, canceling all noise in or out. Ergugah! Diane roared at the top of his lungs. The room vibrated and he felt something pop in his mind. His last thought before he collapsed into his tub, a bloodied mess, was, "I'll make you all pay." The martial world was a cruel place. There was no such thing as ifs. Maybe if Diane had met Darius on another day, he would have been able to put up a better fight. Maybe if he hadn't used up all his soul stamina he wouldn't have lost so miserably. Maybe if he had kept some of his array plaques rather than selling them all, he would have had a chance to find an opportunity to escape. However, none of these things happened. In the martial world, there were no shortage of individuals who had died to unfortunate circumstances, many heroes who had fallen to schemes and many strong that had lost too early. Diane could be considered to be amongst the lucky ones for surviving. Or, maybe that was what others might have thought. Only Diane himself knew what he would have done had Darius' hand truly continued piercing forward. Darius walked through the hallways of Focus Academy with a gloomy expression. Clearly, he was still pissed about how things had ended. If only his spear chi hadn't wavered at the last moment like it had before. If that hadn't happened, he would have pierced through Diane long before Ava could interfere at all. But now, he had to wait for yet another opportunity. How could he not be feeling gloomy? That damned whore. Spear chi, or any weapon chi for that matter, was a tangible manifestation of will that came with the comprehension of said weapon. The fact that Darius had dispersed like that was for two reasons. Firstly, because he had only recently condensed his will into a chi, and second, because his will had wavered. This second reason pissed him off more than anything else. "It won't be long, Master." Blue seemed to look around before he said this, addressing Darius as he always did. "You can just deal with her in the central pillar." Darius sneered. How poetic, going out the same way her brother did. "We should throw that commoner bastard in too, Master." Red interjected. He hadn't gotten a chance to vent his rage on Diane for what he said about their scars. It left him with a belly full of anger he had no way to deal with. Darius snorted. Him. With his lack of cultivation. What good would using him bring? Though Darius said this, his expression turned extremely cold not long after. "Even if he would be useless, that doesn't mean that I won't make certain that he suffers a fate worse than death. Who knows, I might let him watch as I knock that woman down a peg." Drip. Diane opened his eyes, feeling the dripping cold water slide down his forehead. He stared blankly at the ceiling, remembering the events that put him in such a sorry state. Without getting up, he turned the cold water on, blasting it onto his head as he took deep breaths. His once broken arms seemed to have no effect on him. After half an hour, he finally stood and threw his clothes away from him. Turning the shower head on, he placed his forearm on the bathroom wall, letting the once dried blood pool at his feet. He stared at the drain, watching as the water became clearer and clearer. After another hour, the goosebumps from the freezing water no longer seemed to matter, his breathing had steadied under the torrent of cold. Chapter 33. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Diane stepped out of the shower. The moment he stepped through the threshold, he had practically become an entirely different person. I'm hungry. His voice bellowed, all signs of rage and fury having vanished. Diane flipped over his wrist. I'll have to find a new way to store all my things or figure out how to power my tech with profound stones as quickly as possible. If not, everything within my wrist watch will become inaccessible. Luckily, Diane wasn't completely out of luck. The general had given him a spatial ring along with the profound stones. The unfortunate part was that Diane used up the entire space to hold raw materials for his array plate selling business and also reserved a large area for holding his profits. So, there wasn't exactly any space left, especially considering the ring wasn't very big to begin with. Still, there was a small bit of charge left in his wristwatch, so Diane didn't risk it any longer, dumping everything out. I should look into the chi pond they have flowing everywhere. Obviously, Focus Academy already has the technology to turn chi into electricity. I can waste less time just by snatching the technology instead of researching it all myself. I don't have too much time to waste on this. Making such a decision, Diane began to dig into pile of beast meat. From his understanding, they called this beast white-furred deer. It didn't look much different from deer from Diane's mortal world. However, they were much larger, much stronger, and their meat was packed with far more nutrition. Even for Diane, who deemed himself to be a big eater, it took him almost a week to clean just one of all its meat. This time, he had expected the result to be no different, but half an hour later, Diane sat amidst a pile of bone, his brows raised. It seems my body grew more powerful again. Diane remembered reading in one of the fundamental knowledge books of the cultivation world that appetite often equated to strength. He hadn't thought much about the concept until this very moment. One of the crudest ways to force the body to grow more powerful is to break it down then repair it. I guess I owe Darius a favor. Diane thought to himself, a slight cold light flashing before vanishing. Diane had no idea how long he had been asleep. He knew that the military garb he had worn had a function to aid in healing, so he simply went to sleep, expecting to fall into a coma until he healed. But, he hadn't expected to gain like this. Diane shook his head. I'm still hungry, I'll eat another one. Libro. Diane called out, once again finding himself before the large library desk. However, when the monitors flickered awake, revealing a familiar glassed figure, all Diane saw was quite a worried expression looking back at him. What is it? You look like you swallowed a dead rat. Diane said. Libro frowned and looked Diane up and down. Are you really fine? Do I not look fine? Diane raised an eyebrow. You know, that's not a very polite thing to say, Libro. Libro shook his head. Since this kid still had the mind to be cheeky, he must really be fine. Libro had eyes all over the school, how could he not know what happened by now? However, since Diane wasn't saying anything, it was impossible for him to continue pressing and being a bother. So what did you come to extort me out of this time? Extort is such a harsh word. Diane said with a grin. It's more like a thoughtful exchange between a junior and a giving senior. Diane suddenly heard a giggle sound. He didn't need to think for more than a split moment to realize that it was Madeline's voice. Is that Madeline? Are you trying to hold my girlfriend hostage, Libro? Libro was speechless. She's my niece. Libro suddenly caught him. Wait, what? Girlfriend. If there was one place Libro didn't have eyes, it was Paisha, Neva Peak, for obvious reasons. After all, that was the person territory of a young lady. It would be a bit too inappropriate if he could just casually spy as he pleased. Diane nodded very seriously. I see, so you're her relative. It's nice to meet you, uncle, we'll be a family soon. Libro's lip twitched. This damn cheeky brat, Madeline giggle sounded again, her sweet voice drifting to Diane's ears. The moment she spoke, it seemed as though everyone in the library had been soothed. "Stop teasing my uncle, Diane. We are just friends, uncle." Ah, Libro's face shifted, sending a glance toward his niece. Unfortunately, Diane still couldn't see Madeline on screen, but Libro could. Those words were exactly the words Madeline would say to anyone claiming to be her boyfriend. She was just that kind of docile, but firm-willed girl. She would always politely reject with an eloquence few could match and even fewer could get mad at. But there was a difference this time. Though it was slight and only for a very brief period, Libro was certain that he had seen his precious niece blush, something that he never thought would happen in such a context. Libro suddenly felt it was a good thing Madeline wasn't here to see what happened to Diane, or else who knew what kind of trouble would be stirred. Diane's grin didn't fade even after hearing Madeline's words, his confidence still seeming to be sky-high. "All right, UNC. I came here because I wanted to ask if there was any books or if you had any information on turning chi into electricity." Libro's gaze sharpened. "This. Unfortunately, I cannot help you with this. This is the trademark secret of the Storm family. They've kept quite a tight lid on this even from our Sapientia family." Diane raised a brow. "Is that so?" Diane nodded, feeling that something was off. But he didn't pursue it. "That's fine then, never mind. I was a bit too greedy this time around." Diane smiled. "I'll see you later, Madeline." A soft hum tickled Diane's ears. With that, Diane waved Libro goodbye, his expression casual. Libro only watched his back for a bit before switching the monitors back to their off state. Diane strolled through the hallways, eventually making his way toward the Array Alchemy faction. But, before he made it there, his feet came to a pause. Before him sat one of the many chi pools of Focus Academy. Something felt different from the last time he had stood in this same position. At that moment, Diane realized that it wasn't only his body that had grown again after his run-in with Darius, but that his soul had improved again, and by a massive margin. And now, his soul was telling him to stay as far away from these chi pools as possible. Chapter 34. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Diane walked through a field of herbs, crossing small streams of cleverly planned waterways and ensuring not to destroy any with his feet. He had been tending to this garden with Eli for a while now, so his theoretical knowledge had been slowly fusing with his real-life experience. There would always be a difference between seeing things in books and experiencing them for himself. But, by now, Diane felt as though the difference between these two forms of knowledge for him weren't much different anymore. It could be said that Diane's current foundation for concocting pills was immaculate and couldn't be better. Even if he ignored all the experience he was gaining, after several music sessions with Madeline, he found that his flame control was on a level far beyond what he needed. Diane continued to work with a smile on his face, the sound of Madeline's music bringing him an inner peace. At that moment, Delia came storming in, her momentum frightening Eli who wasn't far away. Diane raised an eyebrow. "What are you throwing a tantrum for, little lass?" "Who's a little lass?" Delia fumed. "What happened? Don't lie to me, tell me everything." Diane scratched his head. What was this little girl talking about now? Truthfully, he had never seen Delia act like this. In a lot of ways, Delia's demeanor was quite adorable. That was because after a while of observation, Diane realized that she had always been doing her best to copy Madeline. Delia tried to give off that same unhurried, confident and silent vibe. But, it was at moments like these where she became ticked off that Fa.Ade would crack a bit. Of course, Diane didn't believe that she was actually some fiery-tempered Sundra, he just thought that her true demeanor wasn't what she displayed. At least now, these enraged emotions, was at least her true self, even though it was only a tiny sliver of it. Are you still trying to hide it? What happened with Darius? Hearing these words, Madeline and Eli both looked toward Diane as well. Diane raised his brows. So it was actually about this. Is there a need to get so enraged? They're my matters to handle. No. They aren't. You're the only one I've seen actually alleviate Big Sister Madeline's pain. If you die, then what will happen to her? Diane chuckled. So this was why this girl was so agitated. Ah, so that's why. It's a good thing you didn't fall in love with me, I've already promised you to Eli. Eli felt as though he had been hit with a random stray bullet. Don't listen to him, princess. Diane. Diane laughed uproariously, feeling very good about himself at the moment. However, when he looked back toward Madeline, he found her giving him back a worried look. It was clear that she seemed to realize that this was more serious than he was letting on. In all likelihood, Delia wouldn't be reacting like this had Diane's life not truly been on the line. Diane, of course, didn't feel this way. Had his stamina not been running dry back then, he wouldn't have suffered like that. And, by now, he had researched even more arrays and was even less likely to suffer. However, he couldn't very well tell Madeline that he had only suffered because of her, right? So, he just smiled and walked over. What? Don't tell me that you're worried about me too. Madeline's expression flushed. It's not like that. Madeline panicked slightly. It wasn't because of Diane's words, but rather because she didn't want him to think that she was only worried about him for the sake of herself. In a rush to explain, she nervously tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. But, the action was so abrupt that she accidentally knocked her glasses off. Diane deftly caught them before they fell to the ground. You look beautiful even without your glasses, Diane said, realizing her eyes were even more golden than he had given her credit for before while placing her glasses back on her face. Eli sat nearby in a daze as to what was going on. That was a girl even the princess called Big Sister. What was Diane doing? Flirting. Successfully. That's my big brother, Eli thought with a smile. At that moment, though, the atmosphere seemingly completely shifted. Diane's eyes sharpened, his aura rising to a new level. The sudden change caught Madeline completely off guard. She could sense a deep rage within Diane that had suddenly snapped away from its chain. A gust of wind swept through the field, causing the waves of the lake to become more fierce. The shining sun was blocked out by something as a fierce voice rung down. Whoever it was that had appeared in the air locked eyes onto Diane, who was currently helping Madeline put her glasses back on, and snapped. Who do you think you are? Step away from her. Without even waiting for a reply, a whistling sound could be heard through the air. Diane, who was standing in front of Madeline, had gold flashing through his eyes as his senses heightened. He threw his hand up in the direction of the sound, allowing tens of defensive arrays to appear, each one larger than the previous, lined up in a straight line that ascended into the skies. It was an absolute gorgeous sight, as though several illusory shields outfitted with golden gears all manifested from the heavens themselves. Bang! 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 The arrow, which was originally nothing more than a streak through the skies that was hardly perceptible, pierced through barrier after barrier, slicing through Diane's defensive arrays and shattering them one after another. But, very obviously, it slowed down with each subsequent sound of shattering glass that resonated. Finally, the arrow appeared before the final barrier in a blink. Diane's raised hand flashed with more arrays as his arm's speed was amplified. With one swift movement, he caught the arrow's body between his fingers, stopping it from piercing his head. Rage fueling his gaze, Diane snapped the arrow in half in his palm. He looked up to find a massive raven in the sky. It had a wingspan that seemed to want to block out the sun and a pair of young men on its back. Madeline's eyes widened before she looked at Diane worriedly. Are you okay? Delia snapped her head up, infuriated as well. This was her peak, no one was allowed here without her permission. Who? Delia shouted. Diane smiled and nodded toward Madeline before looking away, a cold light appearing in his eyes once more. Stairs of golden defensive formations appeared before Diane, rising into the skies. They appeared one after another with a speed that made one's mind go numb. How can he form arrays so far from himself? He's a monster. Even at this moment, Eli's thoughts were exactly like this. The shock of Diane being so close to dying had yet to truly register with him. Diane's feet lit up with tens of amplification and hardening arrays, swirling around his legs as he gently pushed Madeline away from him. He stomped the ground hard, rising quickly to the peak stair. Staring at the young men who had looks of surprise on their faces, Diane's expression only grew colder and colder. This is already the 4th time since I came to this school that someone has tried to kill me. My patience is running thin. Diane's voice was practically a growl. The stairs of gold disappeared, leaving just the one Diane stood on as he looked on. They soared at least 20 meters in the air, staring off at each other. One group on the back of a bird and Diane standing all alone on a platform of gold. However, Diane's next words made the two young men shiver uncontrollably. No. I think I've had enough patience already. Just die. Chapter 35. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Diane's eyes were sharp. A baleful aura flooded from him. The air seemed to thicken, as if the world itself was resonating with his killing intent. The young men didn't know what to think. A boy that was probably 5 years younger than them, wearing a white t-shirt and rolled-up black sweats, such casual wear they could only find on a commoner, was threatening them. When had the young masters of esteemed families ever had to suffer through such disrespect? But, they couldn't find the words to respond. They felt an odd pressure coming from him, despite the youth on his face. In that moment, they realized that Diane had every intention of slaughtering the two of them where they stood. But, Diane heard a shout from Delia that made him frown instead of taking action. Draco. Akihiko. Qinglei. The Duko, Kami, and Dayu family better give me a good explanation for why you're on my peak without an invitation. She called out 3 names. Where is the third person? Diane hesitated. All he saw before him were 2 young men and a bird. What was going on? It was exactly then that the massive raven became illusory. A third young man appeared with dark skin and silver hair and eyes, standing on the now illusory bird along with the ones Delia called Akihiko and Qinglei. Diane's eyes flashed in surprise before they returned to calm lakes. A hint of caution bloomed in his heart. He was still at the stage where things like this could still catch him off guard. This must be a more advanced form of the technique that Pharaoh Kid from the opening ceremony used. Considering that Akihiko character shot an arrow at me, he might be related to Mayumi. Their names both sounds Japanese, so it's very likely. That means this Qinglei is from the Dayu family. The issue with all of this was, Diane had never heard of these 3. He had already met all the genius first years from these families. That meant that these 3 were from upper years. This made them several times more dangerous. Dayu Qinglei was the first to speak, his brow unwrinkling from Diane's provocation. Don't be angry, Sister Paisha, Neva. I just came from visiting my fiancé when Akihiko heard Miss Sapientia's beautiful music. You know Draco isn't one to follow proper procedure, so after Akihiko mentioned visiting her on a whim, we swooped down. As for attacking this kid, Qinglei continued, throwing a glance at Diane, wouldn't you be angry if you saw your future wife being so intimate with another man? As long as he gives a proper explanation for this, we can resolve this peacefully. Akihiko was still staring daggers at Diane, slightly perturbed that his threatening aura wasn't working despite this kid clearly having no cultivation. Plus, the matters surrounding the display of array theory they had just seen grated on his nerves. Madeline frowned. Whose future wife? Diane's face remained placid. Although he had to admit that he was surprised to find his heart so moved by the thought Madeline was promised to someone else, her response was all he needed for the feeling to disappear. If Madeline had been betrothed to someone before, considering her demeanor, it was impossible for her to agree to a date with him should he find her cure. Realizing this, and still pissed, Diane chuckled, "It seems you'll be cuckolded before your imaginary wedding." You. Akihiko was about to load another arrow when his sharp features paused. His bow disappeared and his black eyes narrowed in a smirk. He was what Diane would imagine Mayumi to be in a few years. Tall, dark, and sharp. He had been just moments away from imploding again, but somehow, he managed to calm himself. Ignoring Diane, he looked down toward Madeline with a smile. "Madeline, you're well aware that I've already been accepted into the Infinite Arts sect along with Qinglei and Draco. Our futures are set, and with my family's power combined with your family's, how could we not find a cure for you? My father and yours have come to an agreement. As long as you agree, we can be married by the end of the year. We all know that you used to be an unprecedented genius. How could you be at this small school if not for the gods being blind? When we cure you, we can rise together through the martial world and rule as husband and wife. Since you've already said that this only happens if I agree, then I don't agree." Madeline replied. Akihiko didn't seem too surprised by this answer, in fact, his smirk became even larger. "I know I spoke in maybes and ifs, but the truth is that my family has already understood what your affliction is. As you know, the Kami family you know here is only a small branch of the true main family, and we only specialize in archery. It's almost laughable that they're called a pillar family here, not much unlike your Sapientia family. Considering what your talent used to be, I'm sure you've been to the true main branch of the Sapientia family. How could they compare to this small focus academy? Because of my talent, I've been recognized by a higher branch of the Kami family affiliated with the Infinite Arms sect. As long as I continue to prove myself, I can one day make it to the main branch, much like you once did, my future wife. As you might imagine, this higher level branch has access to much more resources. After realizing this, because of my love for you, I spent endless hours combing through records until I finally found something I believe matches your afflictions perfectly. This, of course, came along with the cure. If you don't believe me, let me explain clearly. Your sickness is not really a sickness. It's a sick joke played on us by the rulers of this world. It's called goddess disposition. Everything about you is the epitome of what a female should be. Graceful, intelligent, beautiful. However, with that, comes an unyielding level of pain that results in excessive cold and shivers. Days when the moon is full result in you being in a coma. And the time spent in those comas is getting longer and longer. Excuse my frankness, but your menstrual cycle occurs more and more frequently, especially compared to the norm, and on the shortest day of every year, the winter solstice. You crave for a man almost as much as if you had been given a potent aphrodisiac. Chapter 36. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Madeline's fists clenched, but her expression remained cold. Considering her silence, Diane didn't need to look to understand that everything Akihiko had said was correct. However, what Diane didn't know was that Madeline was infuriated due to more than just this. She had indeed seen the main branch of the Sapientia clan, so she knew well that the Kami family was nothing more than an ant before them. If even the Sapientia main family hadn't had a cure for her, and her master was equally at a loss, how could she possibly believe that the Kami family was able to accomplish what they couldn't? What kind of ridiculous nonsense was that? The quote-unquote sickness is actually the manifestation of a greatly body type, Akihiko continued with a bright smile, which is why you were a genius many years ago. But, without the proper cure, it becomes a curse instead. However, I have the cure. In fact, I don't mind telling you what it is. After all, we'll be husband and wife fairly soon. Diane was very clear on what was going on. Akihiko didn't mind telling Madeline because he was certain that he was either the only one, or one of very few, that could help Madeline. However, something was off. Akihiko had just said that Madeline had once been a part of the main Sapientia branch and that he would one day make it to the main Kami branch, but if that was true, why would a branch of the Kami family have something the main branch of the Sapientia family didn't have? With just a simple deduction, Diane had already seen through something Madeline herself knew quite well. Since the heavens are fair, you won't need to consummate a marriage with another with a god-level body type. You only need to consummate with someone with a respectable amount of god-level blood. I'm sure you see where this is going. Although my talent is quite high, the main reason I was accepted into a higher branch is because, even within the Kami family, my god blood density is quite high. Akihiko smiled. I'm your cure, Madeline. Before Akihiko could even enjoy the moment, his heart stopped with Madeline's voice. No thank you. I'd want to save my life so I could live it. How could I live my life the way I want if I'm tied to you? What's the difference between that and being dead? Akihiko's fists clenched. But, he managed to restrain himself, smiling confidently. You'll come around soon. In the meantime, his gaze turned sharp as he looked toward Diane. I'd better not see you anywhere near Madeline. If I do, I'll slaughter your whole family. Diane looked unperturbed, before he said with a spine-tingling calmness. Didn't you hear me earlier? You're a dead man. How could a dead man do anything? Akihiko had no time to react. All he saw was a shattered formation and a disappearing boy. Sparkling shards of array fell to the ground below in a sprinkle of golden rain. Akihiko felt his face deform, a massive force bending his nose out of shape as a fist collided with his face. In a flash, he was sent flying from the illusory raven. Diane looked to his left and right at the bewildered Qinglei and Draco. I could attack the two of you too. Or, you could stay out of it and not get embarrassed by a 16-year-old kid. Without even waiting for their reply, another set of defensive footholds appeared beneath Diane as he accelerated towards the falling Akihiko. Delia and Madeline flashed out of their surprise. Dyon wait. Diane didn't seem to be listening. He flashed through the air, landing to sit on Akihiko's chest upon an array suspended in the air. Fist after fist flew at Akihiko's face. Each successive sound rebound resonated through the air, the sound of shattering bone and muffled groans crawling up the spine of all those who heard it. Despite all of this, Diane's face maintained an almost shocking calm. It seemed he wouldn't be satisfied until Akihiko truly died. Is this all a supposed genius has to offer? Diane threw another punch. You're 22, at the 6th layer of the foundation stage, and can do not a damn thing against me. Diane vented an endless tirade of rage. For a moment, Akihiko's face seemed to fuse with Darius. If only he hadn't been so tired back then, if only he could have fought back. That humiliation would have never occurred. Diane stood above the barely recognizable Akihiko. His fists were bleeding, and his bones were cracked in at least tens of locations. Using his amplification arrays so wantonly and even bashing in the face of someone who had tempered their bodies to the 6th layer had obviously taken a huge toll on his body. But, Diane didn't seem to care. His right arm cocked back as tens of mini arrays became hundreds, each circling around his arm like miniature disc. I don't care if I have to give up this arm for an entire month. I will never let anyone trample on me again. Just as Diane was about to throw his last punch, the array below him shattered. Something had attacked it and he had just barely been able to move out of the way. Not able to grab Akihiko, Diane dissipated the formations around his arm and formed a new foothold instead. Draco and Qinglei appeared, holding Akihiko. I don't think you're fully aware of what you just did, said Qinglei, narrowing his eyes. Just let me know clearly if you want to end up in his state or not. Killing 1 or 3 dogs makes no difference to me, Diane said coldly. He has no cultivation. But somehow beat Akihiko half to death. Granted, Akihiko lost the initiative, and he's an archer, not a close combat specialist, but, it speaks to this kid's talent. Considering Akihiko's personality, when he wakes up, he'll go to whatever lengths possible. Whether he succeeds or fails, I don't care. As long as I don't directly offend either, I'll have no problems. Qinglei thought, let's go Draco. I'm sorry Diane, I believe that's what the young missus called you, but I'm sure you know I can't let this friend of mine die. I'll let the two of you settle your grudge another time. Diane stared on coldly. He didn't have enough maneuverability in the air to deal with a flying bird, and clearly this Qinglei knew that. Qinglei was just about to leave with Draco and the unconscious Akihiko when he suddenly remembered something and turned back. There's actually another reason we came, Miss Sapientia and Patia, Neva, I almost forgot. Chapter 37. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Central Pillar world is opening up soon. Because Mei Ying will soon marry into my Daiyu family, I was given the opportunity to join. As you know, other Pillar family members of the older generation who still haven't stepped into the Meridian Formation realm find the world very beneficial, and since they're a part of the Academy's Pillar families, they forego the rule of having to be a part of the Academy to join in. That's why we're here. O.org. So, we'll be going to the banquet in a few days as well. Originally, Akihiko was hoping to ask Lady Sapientia to be his date, but it seems this won't be possible anymore. Sorry for the inconvenience, we'll be going now. Draco fully merged with the illusion once again, and gusts of wind took the trio away. Diane slowly walked to the ground using his golden stairs. Beads of sweat ran down Diane's face as he caught his breath. He knew fully well if those three hadn't been fooled by his act and decided to attack together, he would have been left in a sorry state. His soul was still in tip-top shape despite having formed so many arrays in such a short period of time, but his arms and legs had numerous fractures in them due to his body being unable to keep up. Still, if it had come down to it, if there was anything Diane was confident in, it was enduring pain. Diane sat down stiffly, feeling his soul chi spreading throughout his body. It seems like it really was more because of my soul that my injuries healed so fast before. No, it was my aurora flame specifically. But, regardless, my body is still too weak. After a few minutes, Diane looked up to find 3 pairs of eyes staring at him. He had been so caught up in catching his breath that he didn't notice when he became a zoo animal. What is it, do I have something on my face? Diane said, touching his nose. Madeline giggled lightly while Delia rolled her eyes. You know, you just beat one of the best geniuses this academy has ever had within an inch of his life in the matter of less than a minute, Delia said. Even when she said it, she felt that it was incredulous. How had he defeated Akihiko but lost to Darius? Wasn't that a bit too ridiculous? Darius couldn't shine Akihiko's shoes. In fact, Darius would be an obedient little dog if he ever came face to face with Akihiko. The true geniuses of the Storm family were on a completely different level from him. Best geniuses. Diane looked at Delia weirdly. You all use that word too lightly. Every supposed genius I see is more inept than the last. Just look at my Madeline, she's been sick for years and has been unable to cultivate, on top of that she's 4 years younger than him, and she's already at the peak of the formation stage. When you have an example like her, how could he be a genius? Diane said laughing. Author's note. Akihiko is 22, not 18. I forgot to shift all the ages up like I did for Diane. My mistake, hopefully won't happen again. You can see my cultivation. Madeline said in surprise. No one still in the foundation stage should be able to do that, least of all Diane, who had no cultivation to speak of. Big sister, you're that powerful. Even Delia's eyes opened wide. Clearly, she had no idea. Wow, Eli looked shell-shocked as well. Diane laughed. It seems that he had let something out of the bag that he shouldn't have. But, this only made Madeline's lovely golden eyes sparkle all the more when she looked at him. He knew her cultivation, yet he didn't treat her with any sort of fear or trepidation at all. My Aurora is pretty good at deciphering cultivation. That's why I attacked him. I was pretty confident in beating him if I took him by surprise. Diane explained. You were reckless. You have no battle techniques, no movement techniques, no cultivation, and your attack methods are as good as you being a masochist. Why do you love self-harm so much? Madeline berated. Diane rubbed his nose embarrassedly. You could tell I was hurting myself. You're so attentive and caring, how could I let a scumbag like that have you for a wife? After I find you a proper cure, I'll make you mine, Diane laughed. Maybe, but if you can't beat me, how could you find something I couldn't? Madeline said teasingly. Diane chuckled, not bothered at all by Madeline's words. He was actually happy she was so strong, that way, when he cured her, he could take her around the world to dominate it together. On the day he found a way to revive his parents, she would be by his side. Diane shook his head, finding his own thoughts to be weird. I just met this girl. I need to calm down. He found himself to be almost too infatuated. For someone who grew up in the mortal world, and even its western portion with countries like America and Canada, something like thinking such words about a girl he had only known for a few weeks would make him out to seem like a maniac. Although Diane thought those words, he knew that he was already captivated by her gentle nature. For a girl to have been suffering in silence all this time to still have a smile on her face, if she wasn't worth him thinking so much, there was probably no one else that was. However, what Diane didn't know was that his non-committal chuckle made Madeline's heart skip a beat. Though Diane hadn't said a word, that confident laugh to her cheeky reply spoke volumes. He didn't take offense because there was nothing to take offense to. Her defeating him. Sure, maybe for now. But how long would that last? It felt like these were the exact words he was conveying even without saying them. Even so, Madeline couldn't help but probe Diane's bottom line. Even she didn't notice that she had become like a young woman vetting her future partner. I hear you're quite a playboy though. Martial artists live for so long that it's impossible to have just one partner, so if you're too weak, won't I just have to find myself another man? There are plenty of sapientia women with reverse harems. Madeline said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Chapter 38. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Of all the responses Madeline expected, the one that Diane gave was the last. He held his stomach, laughing so hard his face tinged with a bit of red. It may not be now, but I'll soon be strong enough to walk with you side by side. Besides, finding a woman as beautiful and heartfelt as you would be near impossible. What would be the point in me getting a second wife if she couldn't match up to you? Diane's meaning was clear. He didn't even take Madeline having to find a second husband seriously. As for him finding a second wife, in his world, such a thing wasn't the norm, so he was quite serious when he said he had no such intentions. Plus, he wasn't lying in the slightest. To find a second woman on the level of Madeline. He had lived almost 17 years just to find her, it couldn't be that he could actually find another, right? What was the point of having a wife of lesser caliber? Eli and Delia watched awkwardly to the side while Diane and Madeline were flirting with each other. Delia shook her head, exasperated. They've known each other for maybe a few weeks, how did it get to this point? She felt as though she was watching her big sister being stolen away by a big, bad wolf. Madeline and Diane didn't seem to hear her. Or maybe, they really were in their own world. That's a good answer. Madeline said in partial surprise. You'll have to work hard, then. Because although I want nothing to do with Akihiko's offer, my father, mother and brothers love me very much and would be tempted to no end by it. Because of you, I can live in moderate comfort again, and they'll be very grateful for that, but it still stands that I haven't been cured. Though he knew Madeline was joking, Diane nodded his head in seriousness. I hear I'm a genius of array alchemy, there'll come a day when I'll definitely be able to. Plus, I'm very suspicious about Akihiko's claims. If you had the favor of the main branch of the Sapientia family, the literal information hub of the universe, how could they have information you all didn't? It doesn't make sense. If I can figure this out, I'm sure your family can too. Diane wasn't very worried. The Sapientia family were the scholars of the martial world. If they were fooled by something so stupid, then there'd really be a problem. Madeline nodded. This was one of the reasons she had refused so adamantly. She had fallen out of favor of the main clan because of her sickness. Considering her previous talent, why would they give up on her so easily? If it was only a matter of marrying someone with a high concentration of god blood, how could the main branch of the Sapientia family be lacking in connection to such allies? And which allies wouldn't be willing to marry a girl as talented as her into their family even if it meant giving up a talent of their own? On top of considering the fact more than one wife was a normal occurrence in the martial world, there was no reasonable answer for them to give up on her. But, this led to another problem that Diane kept close to his heart. Even if he knew he was a great talent of array alchemy, how could an information-based clan like the Sapientia family have access to allies who were far more proficient than his current self? If the array alchemists had a cure, surely the Sapientia family would have been willing to pay the price for it, right? So why was Madeline here and not cured already? Diane had a bad feeling, but he suppressed it and showed Madeline a confident smile. If even the top figures of the world hadn't come up with a cure, then he would just have to make it himself. So, for the weak men in your harem, what are we allowed to do? Diane said jokingly, lightening the mood. He didn't truly expect an answer, but Madeline once again surprised him. Well, Madeline pondered for a moment with a smile, how about you take me to this banquet? Diane blinked in feigned shock. Covering his crotch with both hands, he put on a scared expression. Don't think I don't know the winter solstice is coming up, don't tell me you're planning on stealing my innocence. Madeline flushed hearing Diane's nonsense. It was Delia, though, that sent a punch flying at his side. Crack. Diane winced, feeling his healing bones become worse. Was this really the price he had to pay for an innocent joke? Watch your mouth. Pervert. Delia completely lost her cool, but judging by her flushed expression, she was more embarrassed than angry. Ooh, oh, ouch. I'm sorry. Madeline pursed her lips. Humph, maybe I'll ask Eli to take me instead. By the way Eli, I've never thanked you properly for taking care of this garden and my medicinal plants before. Thank you so much, you've helped me get through tough times. Eli looked down shyly. It's no big deal, Lady Madeline, I'm just doing my best for the Array Alchemist faction. Madeline smiled, you can just call me Madeline. Diane chuckled, looks like you're better with girls than I am, Eli. Eli blushed profusely, unable to look up. The group laughed a bit before Madeline gave Diane a partially stern look. You're not allowed to wear sweatpants to the banquet, Diane, or else I won't acknowledge you. I'll meet with you at your dorm room with your clothes an hour before the banquet. Diane smiled widely, yes, ma'am. Chapter 39 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Eli and Diane continued to work in the fields, leaping around the small streams of water, planting new seeds, and picking ripe plants. Eli passively muttered to himself the whole time, sometimes saying things even Diane himself didn't quite understand. Fawning grass has a gentle nature, and its need for water is significantly less than other plants. I should move it further from the stream and away from the more dominant devil's willow, if not, it'll end up being used as fertilizer. This'll work. Devil's willow actually needs a high supply of water so that it doesn't dry the soil out with its fire nature. If I design this well, there'll be a nice balance each of the two could grow well in. Soft music played as they worked. Diane was actively listening to what Eli was saying. Although he could guess how to raise plants based on the characteristics he had memorized, he hadn't actually read any gardening technique books. So, Eli was much more of an expert in this area than he was. Plus, these minor adjustments Eli was making made Diane feel as though he was stepping into an all-new world bit by bit. Soon they were finished up and went to the lake to wash their feet. Eli had insisted that they be barefoot in the field so they could make sure not to accidentally harm any plants. By the time Delia and Madeline waved them goodbye, the sun was already setting in the sky. Just like that, Paisha, Neva Peak fell into a pleasant silence, the ambience between two young women blooming. Delia, however, seemed to be itching to say something. But, she had no idea how exactly to put it into words. Unable to hold back anymore, she finally blurted it out. "Big sister, do you love him?" The moment Delia said these words, she blushed profusely. Much like any young girl budding in her youth, Delia was interested in such topics. But, she never quite understood them. Now, however, her best friend, Meiying, was getting married to Qinglei very soon. And even her big sister had her name floating around in marriage talks even though she rejected. It made Delia very aware of her age. Shouldn't she also be getting married soon, then? But to who? There were too many things she didn't understand. Madeline gave a surprised look to Delia, before letting her light laughter fill the field. She remained silent for a while, letting her dainty feet swing across the surface of the lake. Finally, she spoke. "I wouldn't call it love, even I don't know what that word means. But I feel like I know him. I watched along with Uncle at Sapientia Peak when he came to the library with you for the first time. I watched his fearlessness in front of Uncle Paisha, Neva and the other family leaders. I watched him protect his pride even with his life on the line. I watched his proud back as he fought against the best alumni Focus Academy has to offer. I even watched as he was accepted by the heavens." Madeline's voice grew softer and softer, an image of Diane's receding back playing in her mind. That was him. Delia was shocked. It was Diane who caused heaven's chimes to ring. Madeline smiled. "I may not love him yet, but I think it's very well worth seeing what life would be like with him in it. If I can smile with true happiness like this every day, even if my life is cut short, wouldn't it be worth it?" Diane lightly snored. Having lost himself in more study over the past few days, he managed to completely tap himself out again. However, at that moment, a gentle sound drifted into his ears. A soft melody shook Diane awake. He almost jolted up in surprise as he noticed a delicate figure sitting beside his bed. Diane blinked. "Madeline." Suddenly, he jerked completely awake, slapping his own forehead. "The banquet. I'm so sorry." Diane was at a loss. How had he forgotten about something so important? Madeline didn't seem too worried about it as she smiled. Even after having snuck into a boy's room, she was the picture of perfection. Her smooth, fair skin shone through a slit in her cheapao, allowing her slender leg to grace Diane's eyes. Her hair was up as usual, but it was adorned with a beautiful hairpiece comb, shining silver and gold with hints of purple. Her dress was her usual purple, but it was decidedly more elegant and refined. It clung tightly to her curves, making Diane stunned for a while. After Diane finished being stunned, he grinned so widely his lips almost split. "If I show up with you, they'll really kill me for good." Madeline's gentle laughter filled the room. "Go on. I left your outfit in the bathroom. It's only been half an hour since the banquet started, so I thought I'd let you sleep. Since you're awake, we might as well go." Diane jumped up and headed to the bathroom, leaving Madeline staring at the walls of drawn arrays. "He really works hard, no wonder he's so tired. Let me play him a revitalizing tune." Diane walked out feeling fresh. He wore formal attire that more heavily matched the human world. Black dress pants and a tight purple dress shirt clung to him. He had on a watch he almost never wore and had rolled up his sleeves. Madeline walked to him and buttoned something he had missed. "Seems like you really can be quite handsome sometimes," Madeline said with a gentle smile. "How could I ever be handsome enough for you?" "I'll have to make up for it by being stronger." Diane was completely infatuated. He tilted up her chin, snapping her away from her focus on fixing him up properly. The two were so close that they could feel the warmth of each other's breath. Their gazes were locked onto one another, their heartbeats pumping in sync. Chapter 40. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Madeline was frozen, unable to stop looking into Diane's clear eyes for a long while. All right. She shook her head. Let's go, we're already late. No. How could I let you walk there? I might be struck down by the heavens for something like that. Diane stopped Madeline from walking out of the door in her fluster. How could he allow such a beauty to walk? Madeline turned back to Diane, a bit puzzled. How do you want to get there then? Diane smiled mysteriously. He walked towards the window and placed his hand on it. A flood of golden light started to push the water away from the glass, causing a perfect semi-dot sphere to appear on the other side. Complex symbols and gears reflected into the room, dancing with the dark blues of the night's waters and making a gorgeous sight. Diane turned back to Madeline, extending his hand. After a small hesitation, a delicate hand slipped into his, a look of curiosity on her face. This is something I've been working on for the past few days. Pushing the water away is just a sphere-form version of the defensive array I recently mastered, but this is the really cool part. Diane drew his hand back before tapping on the window. An array began to form from 8 different points, swirling with shades of gold. 10 minutes later, Diane stretched out his free hand and to Madeline's surprise, it passed right through the window. This is a small dot-scale space-type array. I can't speed array it yet, but it's really useful for passing through things. Diane turned and smiled at Madeline. Let's go. A small staircase into the large window formed. Diane guided Madeline through and into the dark water slowly. Madeline looked around and touched the edge of the defensive formation. Her beautiful face spilled over with joy and fascination. Wow! When she looked back at Diane, all she saw was his gaze remaining intent on her, causing her to blush a deeper shade of red. The sphere started slowly ascending through the water. The moonlight sparkled through the lake and the stars shone in the sky. Breaking through the water's surface, the sphere of gold disappeared. Madeline could only cling to Diane's arm as they soared into the sky. I've got one more surprise, Diane smiled, lifting his free hand to cause formations of small birds, butterflies and lilies to manifest and begin to revolve around them. The defensive formation below them started to change. It grew wings and lit on fire as though it was a phoenix. A sharp call rang through the skies as Madeline's eyes glistened. Watching Madeline's face bloom with happiness, Diane felt as though he sat on top of the world. But, then he thought of something quite awkward. Where exactly is this banquet being held at? Diane asked, coughing lightly. Madeline giggled and pointed in a certain direction. That night, a phoenix soared through the skies accompanied by beautiful fluttering creatures. It brightened the night as it gently flapped its wings. On a certain peak, festivities were already underway. Mei Ying clung to Delia's arm, pouting. Her violet eyes reflected with some helplessness. Ugh, Delia, I can't stand him. I can't believe my dad agreed to this marriage, now I can't even get rid of him. You know the Bai and Dayu family have never been on good terms. My father is such a coward, jumping on the first chance to court peace by selling off his daughter. Delia smiled bitterly. They had had this conversation a million times already this night alone. Sometimes you just have to do things you don't want to do for the greater good, Mei Ying. Chenglei isn't so bad. He's well-mannered and a great talent. He's handsome and, at the very least, he's not Akihiko. Mei Ying's pout deepened. Well, why don't you marry him then? He may not be Akihiko, but he might be even worse. Chenglei always holds his emotions in check, you can never tell what he's thinking. What if he's even more of a psychopath than Akihiko? You might never see your best friend alive again. You're being overly dramatic. Delia rolled her eyes. The friends were walking through a garden path. A massive arch appeared every few meters, lighting up the path with the shining lights that wrapped around them. Flowers littered the surroundings and the beauty under the moonlight was unspeakable. Mei Ying could only smile bitterly toward Delia's responses. You're so na.ve Delia. I envy your straightforward duty-bound attitude. But I don't know if I can do it. Humph, I'm hungry, why hasn't the banquet started yet? Mei Ying finally found something else to complain about. Come on now Mei Ying, you know our senior brothers wouldn't be able to rest until Madeline gets here. They've been itching to start competing with each other this whole time. But how could they when the girl they've been pining for isn't here yet? Delia made a rare joke. That's true, big sister isn't here yet, could her illness be acting up again? Mei Ying asked with a hint of worry. Yeah, you'll see. Mei Ying looked at Delia, confused. Before Mei Ying could ask what Delia meant, they had reached the end of the path and had entered the banquet area. Under the night sky, a long table adorned with white table-wares and patterns was striking. Candle lights flickered and young men and women walked into and out of groups, socializing merrily in the large open space. Mei Ying, Miss Paisha, Neva, have you heard anything from Miss Sapientia? Her elder brother and Akihiko are getting a bit restless. They're talking about going to find her. They're a bit worried that something might be wrong. Chenglei, noticing the two girls, came over. Sorry, Chenglei, we haven't. But, how about you spend some time with Mei Ying, I'm sure she'd appreciate it. Mei Ying pinched her friend's arm, but Delia pretended like she didn't notice. A small smile appeared on Chenglei's face. It would be an honor, Chenglei said, extending his hand toward Mei Ying. Before Mei Ying could respond, a group of young men walked over, causing Chenglei subtly lowered his hand. Many of this group would be easily recognizable by Diane. Even Darius was among the group, although his demeanor was much more reserved and respectful, as though he was scared to offend anyone with his breathing. A young man with golden eyes shining through his crystal-framed glasses walked up and stood beside Chenglei before Akihiko made his way to the girls as well. He had a refined temperament and a powerful momentum. There were no small number of beautiful women stealing glances at him from all corners of the banquet. He was none other than Madeline's eldest brother, Oliver. We're thinking of going to find my little sister, spoke Oliver, but it wouldn't be all right if we entered a lady's room, so we were hoping you'd come with us. The young man's voice was gentle and amiable. It made it difficult for anyone to say no to his request. Big brother Oliver, about the, before Delia could finish speak, a sharp bird cry sounded through the sky. The night clouds above seemed to be on fire as a young man and woman swarmed by golden light and flames stood majestically in the sky. Many couldn't help but look up in shock. Just who came with such grand entrance?